Mark, thank you so very much for doing this second workshop and driving in on this. We're going to do a couple of workshops in January and February that are more sort of beginning of the funnel sales, customer discovery with how to find your audience and how to interview your audience. But that's a sort of more B2C sales process. And you're going to dive in a little bit to the B2B, B2E, B2C to B to B to B kind of thing. And so can you spend a little bit of time sort of setting the background for how you have done that, and then help us understand the vocabulary about all the B to whatever things so that we're all using the same words the same way?
Yeah, I'm going to cover all of that today. So I'll just go ahead and introduce myself, and John, do you mind if I go ahead and start sharing my screen?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. So so sales to business is kind of the conversation today. Last month we did a talk on the topic of sales is not evil, and the reason I called it that is because I think that if you're not in sales, and even if you are, it's easy to think of sales as kind of this just necessary evil or something like that. Whereas I like to think of it as actually a fantastic opportunity, and if it's done really good for everyone. It can be good for the salesperson, but it can also be good for the company and good for your customers. So today what I wanted to do is dive a bit more into the kind of sales to a business environment, and what does that kind of situation look like. So that's my objective for today. And I'm sorry I'm looking around here because I'm trying to get to a point where I can see your faces, but okay, bear with me for just a moment, and we go there. Okay, so just a little bit about me and my background. I have been a part of 5 different startups, ranging from a company that went public to 3 that were acquired by various different kinds of competitors or partners, and then 1 that was a complete failure. I've learned from all those experiences, so I really feel like that I appreciate even the circumstances where we failed, because we learned a lot through the process. In that experience, I have either sold to or negotiated contracts with every one of the companies you see on the right, and more. These are just the ones I could kind of drum up from my memory. And so I have a lot of experience working with all different kinds of organizations and with selling products at all different price points. Also, while I have a lot of experience in sales, I've done just about every other role in a software company other than write code. So I'm not going to be able to save anybody's life by writing code, but I have experience in QA and business operations, marketing, sales, VP of sales, COO, VP of customer success. I've kind of done a little bit of everything except for write code. So that's my background. I've also been a part of a couple of large corporations over the years, but most of my experience has been with small companies. I worked for 5 years at Microsoft. That was enough of that. I was glad to get back into working for a smaller organization. So right now I'm the founder of Brain Squall. We are a customer intelligence platform designed to help organizations gather and organize and share intelligence that they receive or learn about their customers. So that's a little bit about me and my background. What I want to do today is dive into kind of the sales process. John asked you already how many of you kind of are in the like B2B space versus B2C. A couple of you mentioned B2C, and specifically I was thinking of Brittany and Robert. You're both selling a product that's ultimately targeted to a consumer, but you both mentioned that you are working with a channel. And so developing those channel opportunities and those channel relationships really ultimately is a B2B process, right? And you already recognize that, it sounds like. So that's a good thing. So I was going to go through and have everybody kind of vote on these things, but John already covered that. So I'm just going to slide through those and go to this. So today we're going to focus on sales process and sales experience. But before we do, I want to just look at two different ways of thinking about the business that you're in and the business model that you're going after. So the first one I want to look at is this one. It says 5 ways to unicorn. The reason it says 5 instead of 8 is because it originally started as 5, and then the person who wrote the post later got some more insights and expanded it into 8. And the idea here is that if you look at this chart, the question is kind of what size of deal are you going after? And it's important to know too, the difference between the deal size versus the company size. So it's possible to sell a small deal worth $10,000 to Microsoft, right? Microsoft is a huge company, but you can still sell them a $10,000 deal. You could sell a $10,000 deal to a tiny company that only has $100,000 in sales. So this is not about the size of the company. This is about the size of the deal. So if you think about that, and we look at this chart, what we're basically saying is, if you want to build a unicorn, a company worth $1 billion, one way to do that would be to fairly quickly get to $100 million in sales. And there's of course lots of ways to get to 100 million in sales. If you start at the very bottom, you can see this little microbe. That's basically saying if you had 100 million customers, each giving you $1 every year, you would have 100 million in sales. And until recently, that's been an extremely difficult thing to achieve. It's still a very difficult thing to achieve because you need 100 million customers. So an example of that would be something like Instagram. So they were receiving a very, very small amount of money for their users in the form of advertising and promotion or whatever. But they had so many customers that it worked. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a company that is selling a $10 million per year product. And if you only have 10 customers, there you are, you're at $100 million. So that's also extremely difficult to do as a startup, right? I mean, some companies obviously get to a point where they're doing lots of those deals like Salesforce. But to start off with, Salesforce did not sell a $10 million product. They started off in the middle. And so one of the key things as a takeaway here is just that as a startup, the sweet spot is right here in the middle. Anywhere from $100 per year, which would be generally more of a consumer app or an SMB type app, to $10,000 a year. That's your sweet spot for startups. You can get up into that $100,000 range, but getting above that is extremely difficult. And we're going to talk today about exactly what does it take to get into those different areas and how do you approach them. But this is just kind of a key takeaway is, if you're selling something where you're only getting $10 per person per year, you're going to have to get a lot of people to even be able to pay yourself, let alone pay a second employee or other employees. So, and then at the other end, closing a $100,000 deal is it's just hard. It's just very hard. So we're going to talk about all that in detail. All right, and I've included the link here, and we'll include the link on the YouTube video when it's recorded. We'll put it in the notes as well. So the other one I want to bring our attention to is Dave Parker. Dave is a local venture capitalist, and he has been kind of putting together this master list of business models for startups. And as I've gone through the list, I agree with most of what he's saying. There's a couple things he said where I'm like, I'm not really sure that I totally am following him there. But again, there's a link there to this particular concept in the slide here, and I'll add it to the show notes in YouTube. But the takeaway here is there are only so many ways to run a business and make money. These are the 19 primary ways. He identifies 4 other ways that are not really business, so like nonprofit or other things that he identifies on this blog. And then he also identifies a couple other ways that a massive company can also earn income, but not a way that a small startup can earn income. So basically what he's saying is, look, if you're a startup, these are the 19 ways that you can model your business. And what we're going to do today is focus on the ones on the left here, on the B2B end of things, but keeping in mind that in B2C, and so some of you, for instance, are selling products like hardware, like the hearing aid device. Some of those things, you might still have a B2B experience in going after the channel and figuring out how to sell, let's say, hearing aids to Costco, for instance. That would definitely be very much an enterprise experience. So, so these are the two different models. Also keep in mind that, let's take Facebook as an example here. So Facebook and advertising, if we were to go back up to this slide and say, well, where's Facebook on this slide? I would actually say all. They're all of these. I'll bet that they have at least one customer that's giving them $10 million a year for their advertising. And I know they have lots of customers that are giving them like $1 or $3 to advertise one little event at a hair salon on a particular little town. And so Facebook is actually doing all of these. You don't have that luxury. Those are completely different sales methodologies. In fact, along this spectrum, there are several different sales methodologies that require different systems, different approaches, different marketing coverage, different tools, different teams, different mentalities of the salespeople. There's a lot of difference from that spectrum. So you don't have that luxury. You need to pick one. Along this spectrum, you need to kind of say, my sweet spot's going to be, I'm going after $1,000 a year. I'm going after $10,000 a year. I'm going after $20,000 a year. Whatever your case is, you want to pick a sweet spot and then go after that. It's going to be very difficult to do multiple at the same time. And I'm sharing that from observation, also from experience. So because I actually have been a part of companies that started at the lower end of that spectrum and tried to move up, had a lot of difficulty with that. Started at the higher end of the spectrum and tried to move down, had a lot of difficulty with that as well. So, so those are the two kind of reference points I wanted to start with, just to be kind of thinking about, you know, which one are you, and how is that going to inform your sales process. So the next thing I want to do is hit on this kind of definitions. And I said my definitions here. You know, this is like religion or politics. Everybody thinks they're right, and probably nobody is. Ultimately, the truth is, I'm saying my definition. So I could be wrong here. John might totally disagree with me. Who knows? But this is just the way that I'm thinking about it. So when you hear me say certain things, you can see where I'm coming from. If we look at B2C, that's business to consumer, right? I assume you all know what that means. But so that's consumer. Typically, when you're selling to a consumer, there's one or two stakeholders. I say two because like maybe my wife and I will talk about something before I buy it. But generally, it's, you know, you're selling to one person, right? If you're in a SaaS business, your pricing might be somewhere in the kind of free to $100 range. Now, keep in mind that, you know, real estate, I could sell a house for $2 million, and that's still B2C, but that's kind of a different ball game, right? So I'm thinking more about either SaaS business or like product type business or service type businesses. So that is, that's what we're thinking about here. Okay, the other thing is typically like in a SaaS environment or something like that, your contracts with B2C are going to be shorter, right? So very often it's going to be month to month. Think about your Verizon plan. Maybe that's like a year-long plan, but a lot of things are month to month. It might be annual, like I pay for my Prime on an annual basis, but a lot of it's monthly. The duration means how long does it take to sell it? Maybe days, could be hours. It's pretty quick, right? So it's typically people are looking for something, they make a decision, they do some analysis, they pick, they buy. And the risk tolerance is high. So because I'm not spending a lot of money, I'm willing to try something. If I don't like it, okay, I'm out $75, it's not gonna kill me. B2C to B is, and we're gonna investigate this in a lot more detail here in a little bit, but that's where I'm selling something to an individual business user, but it's a business product. And my ultimate goal is probably to get the business behind the business user to ultimately use my product. So it's actually a pathway to B2B. But a lot of companies do this and have been very successful with it. Trello is a great example. And so stakeholders there, again, you know, for me to use Trello, one person, I look at it, I like it, I buy it, it's $25, it's not that big of a deal. I might get up into the, you know, like LinkedIn, $79 a month, $100 a month for some of the more advanced features. That's more in the $1,000 a year type range, but that's kind of for your individual business users. You can usually get away with that, and you can expense it, right? Oftentimes the contract is monthly, can be annual, but oftentimes is monthly. The duration for the decision cycle, typically probably again days, could even be hours, might go into weeks. And the risk tolerance is fairly high, again, because I'm only spending so much money, especially if I can do something monthly. If I can sign up for something at $79 a month, it's not going to kill me. If I'm out 79 bucks, I'm not going to die. B2B is business to business. And stakeholders there, I would say 1 to 5. Now, some people would say maybe B2B is really like any business. I'm just going to say B2B is going to be what some people might call small, medium business. But again, all these definitions are vague and a bit nebulous. So I'm just saying here, B2B, I'm going to distinguish that from B2E, which is enterprise, or government, which would be G. And say that if you have fewer than 5 stakeholders, if you're like less than $50,000 for the annual contract value, that contract is probably an annual contract. Go ahead, John.
Can you be specific about what you mean by a stakeholder? Because I don't think everybody's on the same page with that yet.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Thanks, John. So with stakeholders, what I mean by that is people involved in the decision process. So that's not necessarily, well, it could include users, because sometimes users are asked like, hey, what do you think of this product? If I'm a small business of 20 employees and I've got 3 salespeople and I'm looking for a CRM solution, I might say to my salespeople, hey, I want you guys to look at these 3 different options. We've got Pipedrive, ActiveCampaign, and Salesforce. Why don't you look at each one of them and tell me what you think? Those are stakeholders. So those are people who are going to be involved in making the decision of, do we pick this product or not? And so they're gonna weigh in, and it's gonna make the process more complex. That's an important thing to understand.
Does that include the gatekeepers?
Yeah, I think of stakeholders as being like very broad. So it's basically anybody that's involved in the process. So if you have a kind of administrator that you need to talk to, that's then going to eventually introduce you to a real decision maker who's maybe more senior, and then there's a couple other people who are going to weigh in. Maybe there's even a third-party consultant. Those are all stakeholders. So I think of stakeholders as being very broad. It includes gatekeepers, decision makers, third-party influencers, security and privacy audit, all those kinds of things. So in a small business, that's rarely going to be more than 5 people. You usually have kind of the ultimate decision maker, maybe a couple of users. Maybe there's somebody else that's kind of has like an IT hat, or maybe a third-party consultant or something that's helping them out. But it's going to typically be less than 5 people. And if you get into $50,000 a year, people are going to be signing an annual contract. Might sign a multi-year contract, but typically annual is going to be common. How long does it take to close those deals? It depends, of course, but probably a month. Might take more than a month. And it could very well go up to like 6 months. If it takes you a lot longer than 6 months, you've got a problem, because you're only making $50,000. So you've got to watch out for that. And also, what are you measuring? Are you measuring qualified lead to close deal? Are you measuring brand spanking new lead that you've never met before to close deal? There's question marks along the way there, but the general idea here is you need to get something done in 6 months or less to make that pencil. And then the risk tolerance starts going down, right? So the more money they're spending, they're going to be a little bit more risk averse, which is why they take more time, which is why they include more people, right? So all factors to consider. Then let's go to enterprise. And that's where I have the most experience. I've done a lot of the B2B as well, but my favorite, I guess, area is the enterprise, because it's complex, and I like complexity. I like the challenge of that. That's where you might have 100 people involved in a decision. I worked on a deal once with HP. It was a $1 million deal, $1 million per year, and that one, we had 70 different people involved in the decision-making process. We had users, we had people from IT, we had third-party consultants and advisors, we had, and a lot of those were users from across lots of different groups. And so there was tiered structure to that as well, from the users on the front line to the VPs, and then we had senior people that were looking at it from a budget standpoint and everything. It was very involved. That process took a year to close that deal. And the contract was, I think, a 7-year contract. So, multi-year contract definitely gets to be much more common there. And the duration of those deals, if you can close a big deal worth 100, that's great. If you can do that again and again and again, that's really great. Typically it's going to take you months. It's just the reality. It's going to take months. And the risk tolerance is low. The more people get involved, the risk tolerance gets way, way lower. They really want to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row. They're going to do security audits. They're going to do penetration testing. They're going to try and do everything they can to break whatever you're doing to make sure that it's going to stand up, that it's enterprise grade, right? And then we have the B2G. I have some experience with that, not a ton. I will just say that the experience I've had has been mostly negative. So, and even the deals we won were ultimately negative. So I generally steer clear from that. I think if you have expertise in that area, if you're former military and you really understand the way the military works, then you probably would be much more successful at selling to the military. So there are things like that to keep in mind, but typically your price point in the government can go to infinity, as we're all aware. The contracts are very often multi-year because usually the deal takes years to even consummate. I remember I was working with the Navy once and they sat down and they wanted to get some budget and pricing information from us. I was a part of a startup. We had only been around for 5 or 6 years and they wanted to know our pricing. And I said, great, when are you looking to make a decision? And they said in 2 to 3 years. And I mean, that's what they admitted. Ultimately, that deal ended up happening more than 3 years later. So that's my experience. That's the kinds of experience that I've had with the government. And that's why I said, decades in terms of how long it takes to close the deal. And I'm joking there, but it can take a very long time. They have no risk tolerance, right? They want to double check and triple check everything. And so that's just something to watch out for. So any questions on this? We're going to talk about a lot more of the 3 in the middle here, but any questions on this concept?
One comment about the business to government. I had somebody who does engineering services make a pitch saying that we should be selling our services to companies that sell to the government, because like everybody who sells to the government, they get these nice contracts. They know how to run the bureaucratic, gauntlet to get in there. But once they get there, they often need help. And there's lucrative business to be done, like selling basically B2B or business to enterprise to people who sell to the government. So there is kind of a viable path in that direction too.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stuart. I totally love that one. That's the picks and axes approach, right? So it's like somebody's already sold the thing, and then you can go in there, and now they're like, oh, geez, I'm in, and it could be very lucrative. So they have plenty of budget, and then you can help them be successful. So yeah, excellent. Yeah, and the cool thing is there's so many variations on all of these. So excellent. Okay, thank you for that. So what I want to look at here is a couple of specific paths. So we're going to actually look at all 5 of these in detail. So this is just a quick kind of snapshot of it. So basically we have here is B2B freemium, right? So think of Trello. Trello is a product that's designed generally for business. I mean, I actually use it to keep track of my to-do list on the weekend as well. But generally it's a business product. But it's free. It's you can, as a business user, you can sign up, you can use it for free. And so the customer commitment is extremely low. And then if a bunch of people at this one particular company all start using Trello, maybe it makes more sense to become a business customer. We'll talk about exactly what that looks like in a moment. B2B to B2C to B, again, same model, but no freemium would be Smartsheet, an example of that. So Smartsheet, to my knowledge, was never free. I was one of the early customers of Smartsheet, and actually I used to work with Onyx, which was a company that was founded by the same founders that founded Smartsheet before they founded Smartsheet. So I was familiar with all those guys, and they started the company. I was like, oh, this is a cool thing. I started using it like 10 years ago, I want to say. And it was like $100 per user per year, more or less, for the price point. And we'll talk more about this in an example in a moment. But again, customer commitment is pretty low because it's pretty inexpensive for an individual to just get it and expense it. And then eventually Smartsheet goes in and sells to the business. The pilot approach is going after a business where you are going to come in and just look at a specific like proof of concept or a pilot where you go after like a small group and say, okay, hey, we're just going to take this one little corner. We're going to do this one little corner project. If that goes well, great, then we'll expand from there. The commitment there starts to get higher. And I have an example of that that's private, so I can't share the name, but we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. Custom to product is where you're going in and basically doing what a lot of the big kind of consulting firms and kind of custom build firms have done in the past, but you're doing it with a product mentality. So you're basically going into a company and saying, we're going to build a custom solution for you. And when we're done, it's going to be a product that we're going to then go and sell to other companies. And you're going to, that I was a part of called Anaqua, did that with 3 big companies. There's a big enterprise approach. So they went in, they sold this to 3 big enterprises. They got $1 million from each one of them. They built this big custom thing. But while they were building the custom solution for Microsoft, Coca-Cola, and Kimberly-Clark, they collaborated to make sure that it was all one unified product. And then they took that product out to the market. So that's another approach. We'll talk about that in more detail. And then the rising tide approach is to go after small businesses that are growing fast and then grow with them. And we'll talk about that in some more detail here in a moment. So to cut it down, so looking at that freemium model with Trello, very inexpensive. It's free, but if you can pay for some like upgrades and stuff that are all so low in cost that you could easily expense it, easily put it on your corporate credit card. They have referrals. I said here $20. I think at one point they were paying for referrals. Then they just offered it as like you could get upgrades if you did referrals to kind of higher value and get new add-ons and things like that. The goal there is you get a bunch of users to use it, and once a group of users are all using it, then you go in and pitch with the commercial sales team, hey, such and such company, you've got 25 users or 50 users or 100 users all using our product. Wouldn't you like to have some enterprise controls? Wouldn't you like to have maybe some enhanced security, uptime, performance commitments, ability to audit reports? Those are the types of things that businesses are willing to pay extra for, in addition, above and beyond what otherwise could be a free or very low cost product. And the benefits to business of all of those things is substantial enough that the price differentiation between the free version or the very low cost version and the enterprise grade version could be substantial. So this is a potential model. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is, I don't know why this didn't come up here right. In terms of the requirements to make this work, you've got to have super easy onboarding, right? So Trello is super easy. You turn it on, it just works. I don't need any integration. I don't need to integrate it with any other solutions. I'm not pulling data or pushing data anywhere. I can train myself on how to use it. And there's a certain amount of virality built in because I can do things like share stuff with other people. So then they're going to see it and go, oh, hey, this is cool. What is it? I want to use that too. And now they start using it. So there's a little bit of virality there, not a ton, but the more the better for sure. And then there's also a network effect too, where if we're both using Trello now, we can share lists with each other. We can be on a joint list and things like that. So having some virality or some network effect is going to make this approach a more viable approach than in an environment where you have no virality or no network effect. And so the examples I show you later where we're doing like a pilot or custom build, in those examples, those companies had zero virality, zero network effect. So that this approach would not have worked for them. So those are factors to keep in mind. Now, if we look at the next one here without the freemium, really mostly the same. The difference here is just that, you don't have to give it away, right? It doesn't have to be free. One of the things you get when you have a product that you make people pay for is a better sense of whether they're actually getting benefit from it or they're actually going to use it. So if your product is free, you might have lots and lots of people signed up and it might make you feel really good, but are they going to convert? Are they going to become business users. And if that's ultimately your goal, then how many free users you have doesn't really matter, actually. You could have 1 million free users, and if you're objective users, because you're not doing advertising or you're not monetizing some other kind of B2C type approach, then having lots of those users actually is just a liability. So you have to make some decisions about, do you want to charge for something or not, and why and how you go about that. Do you have another question?
I want to add in that it's not necessarily the case that you want the free and freemium people to convert. What you want them to do primarily is for them to become advocates and to tell your story over and over to other people and seed other fields. And if you can't get any form of virality out of your free, then it's not worth your while.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily need conversion from that person, but you need them to be blathering to things far away that produce lots of conversions down the road.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And another way I've heard that shared is that free users are not customers, they're a marketing tool. So don't think of free users as, oh, I have this many customers. If they're free, they're not a customer, they're not giving you any money. They're a marketing channel. So they are either doing what John said, they're either sharing the message abroad, or they are have the potential to be converted into a paying user. So, which is good. That's a good thing. I'm actually a big proponent of freemium, and I have some. I'll be glad to share my reasons for that. But the short version is that it can be good. Just don't deceive yourself into thinking if I have lots and lots of freemium users that that's a good thing, unless you have a plan for why you have them or what you're going to do with them.
So, question about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, one of the things about some services is that it takes a while to for the customer to say, yeah, this is going to work for me, and get comfortable with it, and there's that debate between doing a free trial that has it's got a time limit of after 30 days or after 90 days, it's you have to make that decision. On the other hand, giving the customer more leeway of try it for a while, and at some point when you are done trying it, now you can upgrade. That gives the customer more opportunity to it gives them more flexibility. But on the other hand, that's effectively the free tier, which could potentially go on forever, right? It's got that risk. How do you see those trade-offs?
I would say this. I can actually make a very strong argument for both. So I think it really depends on the type of product you have and where you ultimately think you're going with it. Here's the argument for the freemium is that if you have a freemium model, then the person who signed up in the freemium model is a viable marketing contact forever. So you can market to them forever. If a year from now you're making new improvements and you can continue to tell them about that, they're essentially signed up. They're subscribed to your marketing content and information, which they can then share with others or potentially convert themselves into a paid user. And you have the kind of the right to do that for as long as they stay a free user. And so there's an advantage to that. And I have seen some analysis, which I can share with you separately. If you send me just link to me or connect with me, I put my information in the chat window. But I can share with you some information, a report I saw that was a very detailed report of 2,000 SaaS companies and why freemium was better. And having read through that report, I was convinced that freemium is a great approach. On the flip side, the whole concept of freemium is that you have limited functions and features in some way. Because if the whole thing is free, then of course that doesn't work. So there has to be some limitation to it. And if you're going after enterprise or business users, you probably want to give them a chance to use a complete and robust solution to get a sense of what that complete and robust solution can do. So, if you just give them something that's super limited, they might say, well, this isn't good because it has all these limitations, when in fact, your whole point is no, we have this really great robust version over here. So I honestly myself am landing with our product on having a freemium solution that creates that marketing channel, but then in addition to that, offering the ability to trial our robust solution for, let's say, 2 weeks or something like that. But that should be a guided process. When you're selling to business and enterprise, a lot of times they'll ask you, hey, can we try it out? Can we do a proof of concept? Can we try something out? That needs to be a guided process. In fact, here, let's go ahead and take this to this next point here. So if you're doing a pilot, you're doing some kind of a custom or simple implementation for a small group within a larger area, right? And it might be that they're just trying on what you have right now. Maybe you're not doing customization. So proof of concept can be anywhere from, hey, we're going to just try our existing product for 2 weeks. That's a trial, right? That would be the simplest version of a POC or a pilot. To even, we're going to do a whole year-long project where we're going to build a custom solution for a particular group that's a microcosm of the larger enterprise and create something that works for them, prove that it works, and then expand from there. So there's a lot of spectrum here in the POC or pilot kind of an approach. But my point with any of it would be, it should be a guided process. So if I'm just saying like, oh, here, try it on. The example I always use is if you're gonna buy a Boeing 747 or 787 Dreamliner, they don't just say, here's the keys, try it out. It doesn't work that way. Why? Because a person can't just jump into 787 and start flying it around. They have to learn like, okay, how does this work? How am I gonna, what are the advantages? And they need to understand that and be kind of walked through that process. So when you're selling an expensive, complex solution, you can't just throw someone the keys and give them a chance to try it on. You want to manage that process. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's kind of my thoughts on that topic. Thinking more about pilot and this approach versus the B2C to B, to do this, you need to have connections in a network, right? You need to know that particular business or industry that you're going after. You need to have industry knowledge and experience that you can bring, and that gives you credibility to go in and say, yeah, it's worth their time and energy and effort to try this project out, to give it a shot and to spend some money doing it. Remember, their risk tolerance here is going down. The thing to watch out for here too is your pricing. So I would be careful to not give it away, the pilot. The temptation when you're brand new and you're just starting out is like, oh, I'll give it to them for free, because then they'll try it and that's good. People don't value something that they don't pay for. So I always say, it's like the free puppy syndrome, right? I mean, if you have free puppies, then you're going to get it. They're going to go to the wrong home. You want to charge something for them so people are going to value that. So I think when I suggest pilots or proof of concept, I would definitely charge for that process. Charge for your time. And to the extent that you can, as much as possible, maximize your ARR or your recurring revenue, your subscription, or whatever your ultimate goal is, and minimize your professional services. Meaning, if I'm going to sell a product that is, well, I'll give you an example. I worked with a company once that sold a product to Apple, and when I joined the company, Apple was paying them $20,000 a year for the subscription to the product, and $1 million a year for professional services. Now, if you know anything about how businesses work in the SaaS business and valuations, your multiple on your professional services is 1x at best. So that's not really giving you a lot of valuation. On your ARR or your subscription recurring revenue, it can be anywhere from 5 to as crazy as 20x. So having $20,000 getting that little multiple is terrible. And one of the objectives we had was to get them away from the professional services and convert that into product subscription, because the product subscription at $10,000 was way underpriced. But then they were giving them so much money in the consulting side. So that was one of the challenges we had to do, is to renegotiate that whole arrangement and move it up. We ultimately, I think, got more like 200,000 in the subscription. And that was a much, much better arrangement. So, so those are, yeah, go ahead.
So in a case like that, how do you frame it to the customer? Do you basically say, well, our like software subscription is for you guys is this expensive, but it includes some amount of like customization that we can do for you. But so it's basically like a premium subscription model.
Yeah, definitely. So that's why for a lot of companies that are doing B2B, their enterprise pricing usually says call us, right? Because there's not just a price. It's we're going to discuss it. It's going to be a conversation. We're going to figure it out together. And the reality is too, sometimes you're going to be dealing with two different budgets from them. So that's something you might have to watch out for. But generally speaking, my approach always is just to say, hey, look, I'm a software company. I'm not a consulting company. So my preference is to make money on selling software. So I'm going to sell you the software at this price. And I'm just going to tell you, we're going to throw in all kinds of consulting work to make that happen because we want to see you succeed. And this is the that we're signing up for, right? So we commit to building this functionality or doing this integration or these other key things that you're going to need to be successful.
How do you figure out the price to sell that at then? Because there's a really large variable component.
Yeah, your question was, how do you figure out the right price?
Yeah, I mean, for something that includes like, you know, we're going to do some amount of customization for you guys. Like that could be like one engineer, or it could be 5 engineers. There's a lot of variability in that, right? So like, how do you scope that?
Yeah, that's difficult. So it's going to be unique to the situation. I put my link in the chat window. So if you want to schedule some time with me, we can spend 30 minutes like really digging into it. But the short answer is it's going to depend a lot on your situation. Also, think about that your subscription, you're signing a multi-year subscription agreement, right? So whatever you're charging in year 1, you're going to charge again in year 2 and year 3, and you'd probably like to even see that grow somehow, whether it's based on volume of users or something. So you have to have all of those things in mind as you're contemplating it. And I'm not saying don't charge anything for implementation. Sometimes implementation is going to be substantial, and so you need to charge them for that. And I guess the risk here is it's really easy to go to a company like Apple and say, hey, we're going to do this implementation and the software is going to be free or $10,000 or something cheap. And then our consulting services are going to be at $200 an hour. They're accustomed to paying $200 an hour. That's not a problem for them. And so for them to budget that is easy, but it's actually really detrimental to you. So that's where you need to be thinking about, like, where do you want to earn the income? Where do you want that revenue to show up on your statements? And then think about, okay, so how can we do that in a way that's going to make the most sense long run? That's the thing to be thinking about, is the long run. Couple other thoughts on this in terms of the pilot. It's a good way to kind of get in. It's lower risk than doing the custom build solution, which we're going to talk about here next. It's faster because you're looking at a smaller implementation. So you can do a POC in maybe a month. Maybe it's a couple months, could be a year, but that's starting to get into another kind of realm. Speaking of another realm, here's this custom to product. So here, basically, you're building a custom solution, but you're doing it with a product mentality. Some people might say, what's the motivation to the business to get that? The motivation for the business is that they're getting a solution that's going to be very custom tailored to their needs, but they don't have to own it. So if I go to Arthur Anderson, or I gotta think of him, I don't even know if those guys are even in business anymore, but if I go to Anderson Consulting, there we go. If I go to Anderson Consulting and I say, hey, build us this custom solution. Great, Anderson will build that for me, and then they'll go away, and now I'm responsible for maintaining it. And inevitably, things are gonna change over time, and I'll have to maintain this kind of clunky solution. And in this approach, we built a custom solution for Microsoft, Kimberly-Clark, and Coca-Cola, and we took $1 million from each one of them. We built out this solution that was very much tailored to the needs of those 3 organizations. But we knew that those 3 organizations would have a need that would overlap because it was to manage intellectual property. They all had lots of patents, trademarks. And so we built a solution that worked for all of them. Now, what we then said is, okay, now what's happening is we're going to go forward. The IP is ours as the vendor, and this is our product, and you're going to pay a subscription for this going forward. And then we're going to go to the next company. In this case, it was like Qualcomm and then Diageo and others, and they're going to pay us to do additional consulting services, which will fold into the product, and the product will get better, and everybody benefits. That is a great model. It's a difficult model because you really have to know your stuff. It's a huge bet that company is making. So in that case, Microsoft, Coke, and Kimberly-Clark were all making a really big bet. It was a 2-year-long project with lots and lots of stakeholders. So very complex, but it paid off. In the end, they had a great product with 3 fantastic testimonies, and were able to then go and do that with other customers. And that was a way to basically start at the top of the market, because what they were selling was intellectual property management software. And so, Microsoft, Kimberly-Clark, and Coke, pretty big brand names, pretty big trademark portfolios, and pretty big patent portfolios. So it was a great place to start and then go to the rest of the market with this best of breed solution. It was a product that had basically would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to have a single user, no virality to it at all. It's a process management solution. So it kind of needed to be sold in this kind of approach. One thing to watch out for if you do take an approach like this, and I've seen this gone badly, is when another company I was with sold a deal like this to Sanofi, which is a massive pharmaceutical company in France. And they thought that they were getting this amazing deal because they were getting $200,000 a year for the subscription. The problem is that they spent $1 million worth of time getting it implemented. So that ended up not being a great deal. So something to watch out for, right? Be really careful on how you price and setting these expectations. I can say that when Anaqua was first doing this, one of the first things they would say in every conversation is, look, this is going to be $1 million deal. So if you don't have the stomach for that or the budget for that, then we should just move on, because we're looking for companies who are ready to do something that's transformational, and it's going to be a big commitment, and we need to know right up front that you guys are willing to do that. So very, very different ball game than the other one we're talking about. Go ahead, John.
It's kind of hard to walk up to random people on the street and say, this is $1 million deal. Are you in? So there's some warming up to get to those big questions. Can you talk a little bit about the journey from I knocked on the door at HP to I signed the $1 million contract to make that particular custom development work?
Yeah. So the reality is that it has to start warm, right? I'm not aware of an example where this started totally cold. So, and when I say start warm, it's like the people who were starting this company had already been in the business, had already had a network of connections, and had deep industry knowledge and experience. And so they were
also
able to
knew the people they were talking to at their client enough that you had already gotten through the first 2 stages.
If they didn't know them, they at least had secondary degree connections. And so they were able to say, hey, Bill at Ford recommended that we talk to you, and we think you guys would be an ideal candidate because, hey, Microsoft, you're planning on, you want to be a leader in intellectual property, you're going down a new path. This was a time where Microsoft had just gone through the DOJ cases and realized that their patent portfolio was sorely lacking. And so they needed to really beef up their whole patent operation. So they were completely renovating the internal structure of the way they managed intellectual property. And then this company was able to come in and say, hey, you're doing something completely new. We can be a part of that completely new thing with you. And we have the trust and credibility of these other people that you also know. So it was definitely a warm conversation from the beginning. Not warm as in friendly, because it wasn't friendly. It was very complex, very difficult, and took a long time to negotiate. But just setting up that initial deal was a year-long process of just setting up that initial contract before they even started writing a line of code. And that was with a warm lead. not a cold lead. So yeah, this is a tough way to start a business unless you're already in that business. You're coming out of that business, so you already know people in that space. You already know the industry. You can speak immediately to the troubles and pains and difficulties that an organization already has.
So it was a whole year with a warm lead for a company to live with no revenue at all for a whole year, for them to get to the point where they were able to write a contract, which then some 6 months later turned into cash, right?
Something like that. Yeah, it's a long, hard. This is a long, hard road to hoe. This particular business has done extremely well, and the model worked very well for them. But they had certain things coming into it that you have to have. They had to have that network. They had to have that industry knowledge and experience. Without that, I think this is crazy. And I've seen people try that. I've seen people talk about, oh, I'm going to go sell this thing to this industry. And I'm like, you don't have any experience or knowledge in that industry. Yeah, no, but I have this idea and it's going to be really great. I'm like, whew, good luck. I'm not putting my money on that deal. The third one that I've seen, or the third model of these kind of direct B2B approaches, is this rising tide approach. So another company I was with called IPfolio, they started out selling to small but fast growing companies. And a couple of the companies they sold to were really tiny, and it was not clear exactly how big and how fast they would grow, but they included Facebook, Uber, Lyft, Waymo, Workday. And so as those companies exploded with growth, their needs and their demands also grew. And so the company was able to mature, the vendor was able to mature with the rising tide of the companies that they were selling to. And so that was actually a great model, because the needs of those smaller, rapidly growing companies are not that complex at the beginning. Their risk profile is good. I mean, they have a high tolerance for risk because everything they're doing is risky anyway. If you can align your vision to their vision, if you can say, hey, you're building something new, we're something new, why would you, I'm going to use CRM for an example. If I'm going to a small, rapidly growing company, I was selling a CRM solution, I'd say, what, you're not going to do this cool new thing using that crappy old solution Salesforce. Like, use this new CRM tool that's like the newest, best technology, and we're going to grow with you as you grow, and we'll mature with you as you go. That takes some vision selling for sure. But if you're connected into that network of startups, and all of you are, right? So this is a model that I think is viable and should be considered by anybody who's in part of the startup world. The downside, startups don't have a lot of money, so it's not a great way to get a tremendous amount of revenue early on. But you can bootstrap, or if you're doing other things where you can keep your costs as low as possible, keep your systems as simple as possible, and find the other growing companies and support them, give them tools that they need to help them grow, and then grow with them. I think that's a very viable approach. There are risks. One of the risks is that you price your product in such a way that as they grow, your pricing is still so low that you end up having the next Facebook giving you $10,000 a year. That doesn't make sense. And that this company had that very problem, right? So they ended up having situations where they had huge companies paying them very tiny amounts of money because they started off their pricing so low and then never let their pricing catch up to their capabilities as their capabilities enhanced. So, and that's a tough thing to do. Going and changing price on your customers is a very difficult thing to do. Jason Fried at Basecamp has some great things to share around this concept of how to raise your prices and how to fire your customers if you have customers that are unwilling to go with you as you raise your prices. But that's just one of the risks to watch out for when you take this type of an approach. Okay, so I wanted to switch gears here and just talk about a couple of different landmines that I've seen in enterprise sales process. So for the last little while here, we've been talking about different paths of like how to kind of break into the B2B market and the B2E market. When you do that, if you don't have experience, there are some landmines that can really, really hurt you. So each one of these is an area where you might think it's good, or you might think it's not important or whatever, but it can be a big problem. So what I want to do is with each one of these, we're going to look at, so what are some questions you should be asking as you're engaging with these different parties. So let's talk about IT for a moment. IT can't say yes. Sometimes they can say yes. Almost always, IT is not the one saying yes. It's some business person who's going to use whatever it is you're doing, unless you're selling to IT, an IT product. But otherwise, there's some business person that's going to say yes, but IT can definitely say no. And they delight in that because that's the only authority they have. So people whose authority comes from saying no will exercise that authority as often as possible. So questions to be thinking about. If you're talking to a business person and you have some kind of a product that has any touch point with IT, and these days almost everything does, then you're going to want to know, have you talked to IT about this project? Do they know that you're talking to me? Do they know that you're looking for new solutions? And I'm even thinking of those of you that are selling solutions where you may or may not think that IT is really that much of a part of it. I have a hard time imagining a product that doesn't have IT involvement because the IT manages all the systems in the company. And no matter what you're selling, it's going to have to be in some kind of a system. Even if it's a physical thing, it's going to have to be a part of some kind of system. So IT needs to know about it. And it's one of those things, as salespeople are afraid of talking to IT because IT says no. But a good salesperson will get IT involved as early as possible, because if there's going to be a no, you want to know it as early as possible. So you want to get that out of the way. And you want to then be able to object to it, find a solution around it. If they say no because of this, okay, we'll figure that out then. And now you have a chance to do that. You do not want to discover that at the very end. So, are you having other systems you're going to need to pull or push data? Who in IT is going to have to review this or approve it? When will that happen? Sometimes I've been talking to a business person and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to do this. We're really excited. We're going to make our decision next week. And then, oh, it turns out IT needs to approve it. Okay, great. When can IT do that? Oh, they meet quarterly. And the last one was last week. Great. Now your deal just got pushed out 3 months. And it's going to happen. So you need to understand what's the IT approval cycle, who's going to be involved, et cetera. And then the last question here is actually can be one of those areas where you can flip this and make IT your friend. So you say, hey, does IT have any initiatives? Like what are they doing? And so let's actually go to this next slide here. And these are questions you would not ask IT directly. So, what are your top objectives this year? And one of the objectives, when I was selling a product that was a comprehensive solution, one of the benefits of that solution was it replaced 3, 4, sometimes 6 other applications. IT loved that because one of their objectives was simplifying. They wanted to have fewer applications. Well, we could come in and say, hey, we can get rid of 6 of your applications and you can have one throat to choke. They like that a lot. So that was helpful. But the rest of these questions are basically the same questions, but you need to ask the IT person as well. Just because the business person told you, if you do get in touch with IT, ask them again, right? Because you might get a different answer. And again, even if it's a bad answer early is better than getting it later. Security and privacy. This is kind of related to IT, but in a lot of big companies, it's a completely different organization. It's a whole separate entity. And as far as they're concerned, you're guilty until proven tolerable, right? There is no such thing as innocent. And everybody's guilty until they've proven that you're tolerable, that they can tolerate the risks that they see with your product. And so you want to just know, like, hey, is there going to be anything private in here? If you're doing a fertility software, then that's definitely something that people would probably consider to be very private. And so making sure that somebody who might be involved with understanding, like, hey, how are we making sure that we're keeping that information private and secure? They're going to care about that. So is there an audit? Is there a process? Again, this is the kind of thing where you can go through and we're ready to close the deal, we're good to go. And they're like, oh, just one thing, we need to do a security and privacy audit. Oh, okay, how long does that take? When can we do it? Oh, they can't schedule the next one for another 30 days. if you didn't know that, then you're going to be surprised. And that's why enterprise deals take so long, is because people don't understand all these things up front. So try and get these questions answered as early in the process as you can, and it will definitely improve the speed at which you can close deals. Budget, keep this in mind. Just have this mentality. If you don't ask them, they can't afford it. So talk to people about budget as early as you can. This is a very hard thing to do for most people. Most people want to talk about budget at the very end. They want to talk about price at the very end. They always wait to the end to discuss these kinds of things. It's way better off to get these things figured out as early as possible. If somebody can't afford your product, don't spend any time with them. Why you're wasting time if they say that. So when I was selling a solution where our kind of bottom price point was $40,000 a year, and I knew I was talking to an organization that sounded pretty small, one of the first things I do in my very first phone calls, I'd say, hey, listen, now that I've learned a little bit about you, I want to tell you that our starting point for our product is around $40,000 a year plus a $40,000 implementation fee. Is that can you imagine that being within the realm of possibility? And if they say, fall out of the chair, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Our budget is $5,000. Okay, great. Let me recommend these other solutions to you, because we're not going to, our price point's not going to work for you. Well, why is your price so high? It's because our product is infinitely better than those other products. But we understand if you have a low budget, it may not be for you. So you can check out these other ones. Stand firm on that, right? A bad salesperson, and there are lots of them, will try and win that deal. They'll try and convince them to spend $40,000, and the chances of that working are slim. So if they say something like, "Oof, that's expensive. That's a lot more than we were planning on." Why is it so much? And you say, well, if you're interested, I'd be glad to show you. And they say, yeah, I'd be really curious. Great. Okay, have that conversation. Because I sold a product once that was routinely 10 times more expensive. And so I had to set that expectation up front and then say, hey, listen, the onus is on me to prove it to you why this is worth so much more. But if they're willing to engage in that conversation, great, do it. You can close that deal. But if their attitude is that's insane, we would never pay that much. Okay, no problem. Let me recommend an alternative. And then let them go somewhere else. Otherwise, you're just you're barking up the wrong tree. So you want to know who owns the budget, who's going to pay for it. A lot of times people are like, oh yeah, I'm in charge of that decision. And you're like, okay, so when we sign the contract, who is actually going to sign the actual contract? Oh, that's going to be so-and-so. Okay, now you don't say this to their face, but now you're not the decision maker. The person who signs the contract is. So now they might be a huge influencer, and you don't want to be rude to them, but you need to know that there's another person involved. And so if they say, yeah, Kathy's going to sign the check, okay, well, put that in your notes, because at some point you're going to need to talk to Kathy. And also you want to know about timing, right? Budget, fiscal year, that kind of stuff matters a lot. If you don't understand those things, you can roll right over a fiscal year and not even realize it. You can roll right over a budget cycle and not even realize it, right? Oh, we have to make our budget in the month of October. And you're like, oh, great, it's November 5th. We just missed it. Now we have to wait a whole nother year, or we have to go outside of the normal budget cycle, which is going to take double the amount of confirmations from other executives, or they're going to have to go higher up the chain or something like that. So all factors to keep in mind. Okay, next thought here, RFPs. RFP stands for Request for Proposal, if you haven't heard of that. They are great for you if you are selling a product that's similar to products that they've already seen and at a lower price. So it's like, hey, we're coming in for another CRM solution and we're cheaper than the alternatives. RFPs will love you. Inboxes, and you can show your prices lower. If you're coming in and saying, we have a totally innovative approach, it's completely different than anything you've seen before, then their RFP is going to ask the wrong questions. They don't even know the questions to ask for your new innovative thing. They're going to ask all the dumb old questions, and your answers will sound the same as all the competition, and your price will be 10 times higher. It won't make any sense to them. So I've been on both sides of these, and I came first from the company that was innovation, and then I was at a company that was lower price. And when I first saw RFPs, I was like, oh, don't touch them with a 10-foot pole. And the VP of sales said, no, we win a lot of these. And I was like, how? And then I learned it was because the price was lower. So the RFPs can be good or bad. It just depends on who you are and where you're coming from. One of the rules of RFPs, especially higher up in enterprise deals, is whoever writes the RFP wins the RFP. And so just something to be aware of. If someone comes to you and says, hey, we're doing an RFP, we want you to be a part of it, pretty good chance you're not winning it. Why? Because you're not the person who actually helped them write it in the first place. If I go to a company and say, hey, we want you to buy this product, here's how great it is, blah, 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 and they say, wow, that's really cool. However, we have to do an RFP, and you say, okay, great, we'll help you write the RFP. Okay, thanks. I mean, they're not supposed to do that really, but if you are saying, and you have to do this in an ethical manner, but if you can say, well, here's questions you should consider, here's things you should be watching out for, and then they put together their RFP, you basically helped inform that process. There's a very good chance that you can win that process. But if they're coming to you out of the blue with an RFP, again, if you're an innovator, your chances are very, very, very low. So something to watch out for. Who else is participating in this RFP? Why were we invited? If you weren't invited, if you just found it and you're going after it, then even more good luck to you. Will I have access to the business users? Oftentimes the answer here is no, or told. That's, I think, a very bad way to go about doing things, but that's what these kind of professional salespeople do, or professional buyers do. Another thing to watch out for with RFPs, will my questions be public? So if you're an innovator and you're going against an old school solution, and then they say, okay, here, does anybody have any questions on the RFP? And you ask 10 questions, your questions are all revealing your innovation. And then they publicize those questions to all the other RFP participants. You basically just let out all of your great innovation and then shared it with all of your competitors. So that's another part of the RFP process that I really don't like, because the way they see it is they think we're leveling the playing field. I would say if that other vendor is dumb enough that they're not asking smart questions, they shouldn't get the benefit of seeing the answers to my smart questions. So those are all things to watch out for. You can tell I'm kind of anti-RFP. I would not run a process that way myself. And as far as being a seller into an RFP solution or situation, I'd be very leery of them unless I knew that I had a low price solution. And professional buyers, your best worst friend or your worst best friend, one way or the other. A professional buyer is somebody who is a part of an organization called purchasing. They might be a part of IT. They might be a part of the finance group, but basically their job is to go out and buy and negotiate things. They're great at getting paper clips. They're great at getting a good price for the company. They are not great at recognizing innovation. They are not great at recognizing something new or novel. So I would be really, really careful. Oftentimes, as a buyer, their job is to be super nice. The worst professional buyer I ever dealt with was also the nicest professional buyer I ever dealt with. I won't tell you the company, but I will say that interacting with her was like negotiating with Siri. It was like so friendly, so not helpful. If you are interacting with somebody like this, you really want to know who are the users, like who's actually going to be using this. May I speak with them? How is this decision going to be made? When, by whom? Very likely, if you're dealing with a professional buyer, there will be some kind of an RFP. That's the way they typically think about things. Again, it's a great way to buy paper clips, not a great way to buy an innovative solution. So that kind of goes back to the RFP that I said earlier in terms of how to interact with them. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk on here, and then we'll open it up for questions, is contracts. So, so with contracts, I just kind of threw this together real quickly, to be honest. I just want to be really clear. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I did want to share it with you. And one of the things I said in the meetup description is, when is $400,000 a bad deal? It's a bad deal when you have a bad contract. So number one, I'm not a lawyer. I did sell software to lawyers for 15 years. So I've worked with my share, way more than my share of lawyers. So anything I say here is not legal advice. It's just one professional to another sharing some thoughts and ideas. Contracts are money. And the higher up you go on that spectrum of like bunny, deer, elephant, the more important those contracts are. If you're doing a contract that's $150,000 a year for a 3-year deal, that's $450,000 on a piece of paper. What's on that piece of paper is very important. And what their expectations are, what your expectations are, what your milestones are, what the commitments are, the terms of that contract, all of those things are extremely important if you're doing that. If you have 100,000 customers and they're all paying you $10 a year, you're going to have just a single contract. They're all going to sign it. It's just a click through, right? Nobody thinks about those. And you just get a good one from your lawyer and it's not that big of a deal. When you're doing these bigger deals, the bigger they are, the more important they are for each piece of paper. So I've been a part of a company that took contracts very, very seriously. And when that company sold, the multiple was very good. And part of it was their contracts were so solid. So they had multi-year contracts. The contracts did not have lots of out clauses. The limitations of liability were very reasonable. The contracts were negotiated in such a manner that they were strong for the vendor, strong for you. And because of that, they were able to get a higher multiple. Now, that was in an environment where they only had like 150 customers. So every one of those contracts really mattered. I was part of another organization where they had started at the low end, and so they were accustomed to just kind of simple click-through agreements. When they started selling bigger deals, the customers said, well, we want to use our contract instead of yours, and they agreed to that, which meant they ended up getting some contracts that were really, really bad. And so I had that one example I shared earlier where an organization was paying $200,000 a year, but the amount of effort that went into servicing that customer was costing the company $1 million a year. That's obviously a very, very bad deal. So really, you got to watch out for this. I would say get a solid template from an experienced business-friendly lawyer. You want to make sure your lawyer is not being a jerk. They're not going to be a jerk to you. What a lot of lawyers will do is they'll give you a contract that's really, really good for you, and then figure you'll negotiate off of that. The problem with that is it creates a lot of tension right out of the gate, because you go to give that to the company you're selling to, and they're going to give it to their lawyer, and their lawyer is going to be like, what? This is ridiculous. That's impossible. You have no, we're not going to sign up for this. And you create all this tension, and now you're going back and forth. Lawyers are expensive, right? A decent lawyer is going to cost you at least $300 an hour, and they're going to have to sit and negotiate with their other lawyer on this contract. You don't want to get stuck in that game. So find a business-friendly lawyer who's going to write a contract that's going to be enough for you, but that's actually friendly also to the customer, and make sure that they explain all the key components: limitation of liability, term, out clauses. There's a couple different things that are going to potentially be contentious, and you want to go about that in a way that's going to be as good for you as possible. Then when you go to your customers, say, look, this is the contract we need to use, and say, we tried to make it as pleasant as possible for you. I really don't have the resources to negotiate this. I can't afford to pay a lawyer, $300 an hour, $400 an hour to sit down and negotiate this with you. Now, if the contract is for $400,000, they're going to say, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to pay your lawyer, because they're going to probably want to negotiate some things. If the contract is for $20,000, then you have a pretty good case to stand on. Look, I can't spend $600 negotiating a contract. I'm only getting $20,000 for it, right? I mean, I'm already giving up a big chunk of the revenue, and that doesn't make sense. That's not good for me as a business, and you don't want me to do. So you want to have a reasonable agreement and that's good for the client, and then you want to stand firm with that and stick with it. So I would be glad to meet with any of you. I shared my contact information in the chat window. I gave my LinkedIn contact, and I also gave a link to my Calendly, which gives you access to my calendar. If I've shared anything with you that you're interested in talking about further, I'll give you 30 minutes, and we can sit down and talk about your specific situation, because each of you are dealing with really different situations. I hope that you found this to be valuable and insightful. If you did, then I would love it if you would just go on to LinkedIn or Twitter and just mention at Mark Bullard or Mark D. Bullard rather, and share what you learned and just share it with other people. That would be very much appreciated. And now, if you have any questions, I'll take your questions.
So a lot of times when people are starting out, they have the idea and they think they're going to go in, but they haven't figured out the internal structure of a company to know who decides what, nor do they really have the 18 months to figure it out. And so what are ways for early stage companies that, you know, really should be in revenue within the next 3 to 6 months to get some kind of B2B sale that's meaningful for them without that 18 months of digging through the company?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons that investors always say, like, do what you know, right? I mean, you want to be in a space that you already know some people, or you already have some warmth. If you're going after something that you don't know anything about, you're going to have a much, much harder time, and it's just going to take time. And so my expectation, my recommendation there would be keep your costs as low as possible so you can spend that time warming up those opportunities and warming up those relationships, because that's the only way you're going to survive. So that's probably my first piece of advice there. Specifically then, my recommendation would be to go to the closest, warmest people that you know in the space that you're going after, and then be really honest with them. Look, I'm starting this company. We're doing this new thing. It's really innovative. Get them on board. Well, get them on board first, right? If they're not on board, you don't go back to the drawing board, because it's not going to happen. But if you can get them on board, then I think just being as open and honest with them as possible is going to be really helpful for you. I'm right now going through this with Brain Squall. We're just getting started. I'm working on a pilot opportunity with a very, very large Fortune 500 company, one of the top 20 companies in the world. And my conversation with them is with somebody that I worked with 20 years ago. We have a good relationship, good rapport. And so I'm saying, hey man, listen, I need some revenue. I don't need a lot. What I need is tiny for you guys. But I just need to do some kind of a pilot. So I'm just telling them right out of the gate, I'm going to ask you for money, and I need you to help me get some budget to give me some money, because I'm tiny. That I need money to be able to grow what we're doing. And so then then he's introducing me to some other folks, and we're working on trying to set up a pilot. But I'm being really clear right out of the gate. Listen, I'm going to ask you for money for this pilot. I can't afford to do it for free. I have to ask for money because, and I'm going to tell you, all that money is going to go to developers to make the product better. None of it's going to me. So that's my approach. But that has to start with some kind of warm connection.
So let's pretend that I know the stereotype of who I need to go to, and I'm doing my LinkedIn scraping, and I paid my little money to LinkedIn to scrape deeper. And now I have a list of all of these people who I don't know. What can I do to get to that point you just mentioned?
Okay, so one approach that I've used in the past that really opened doors for me and I felt was very helpful. Again, this is from a product perspective where I'm an innovator. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you're all innovators and you're doing something innovative and not just a cheaper solution. So if you're doing something innovative, then my approach has been to create like a maturity model that shows levels of maturity within a particular business process. So I was selling intellectual property software. I said, look, as you're managing intellectual software, there's different levels of maturity. And I created 4 levels. And level 1 was, you know, it's a free for all, and there's all kinds of IP going out the door and it's not well organized. The level 2 was you have some kind of very manual process where you're collecting inputs and whatever. And then level 3 was you have some kind of more systematic approach, but not very well automated. And then level 4 was, of course, a description of my product, which was really synchronized, integrated with other solutions, mapped across the entire portfolio, and had all kinds of great automation built in. And now I put all of that into one page in a simple table of like, this is my maturity model. And then I sent that out to those people, right? So I profiled the people that I thought would care about something like that and said, hey, this is just a quick one pager. Curious to know, where do you think your company sits on this? And would it be valuable to you to move up to the next level of maturity? Would that be helpful for you? That was the most successful piece of content I ever created when it came to opening doors in the enterprise with cold leads. That only worked because I really knew that space. I had worked in that space for a number of years. I understood the problems that they were facing. I could articulate very clearly in a small amount of space, this is where you are. And I could say it in a way that made them kind of feel like, that's not where I want to be. I want to be at the next level. So I think that's something that I think can be really helpful. And it's fun and interesting to think about how to apply that to like any one of the different businesses that you guys are doing. So I'd be glad to help you walk through that, for any one of you, if you're thinking about that, like, okay, well, what would that look like for me if I'm doing like a fertility coach, for instance. By the way, I have somebody I want to introduce you to because I've got a friend who's a fertility coach.
So the approach that you're using was spear phishing, where you are spear phishing specific people. Is there a broadcast mechanism that you would use to reach into an organization where you don't know the specific person, you don't have their LinkedIn, but generally the company you want, and you would plant something in the New York Times ad or plant something in some magazine intending to get into some particular organization?
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of good quality content marketing, and the content marketing kind of definition I've seen that I thought was the most clarified it for me and really made it clear exactly what good content marketing looked like, said that your content marketing should do exactly what your product does in the form of content. And so I'll go back to this IP management situation. So we're selling software that helps you manage your intellectual property. Great. We should create content that helps you do that. And so if I can create a piece of content that would help a person who's in the job of manage patent portfolio or review trademark applications or whatever, then that content is going to be relevant to anybody who's in that space. And now if I do create some content like that, and then I create a link to it now on an ad in LinkedIn that's targeting anybody who has the word trademark in their business title or something, now I have created something that's valuable to them. And I'm starting to associate me, my name, my brand with this valuable content. And that's the way content marketing is supposed to work. Unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they create just lots of garbage, 5 tips, 5 tricks, whatever, that kind of stuff. That's not really all that helpful. So, and that has become so popular because content marketing has become so popular that there's lots and lots and lots of garbage out there. So I think these days, if you want to do content marketing and do it right, you have to make something that's really, truly valuable, which takes time. So you just, and it also takes industry knowledge and experience, right? So if you don't have the industry knowledge and experience, again, you're barking up the wrong tree.
Any questions from anyone else that we want to put on the table?
Yes, I would have a question. So as I said, I have a SaaS company, and we are selling the software product, and I approached one bigger company, and of course they wanted to have different features in the application, which is they consider that is not enough for them what we have. And I offered them that the first year what they're paying, it will be customizations for them. And they accepted the deal. So I'm really happy about it because it's a big company. I want to ask, what are the risks of this if I'm making other deals like this?
First of all, I think that's a great approach. I think that's very similar to the one that I was describing with the kind of custom to product, where you came to them and said, look, I have this baseline set of functionality, and they said, great, we'll buy it, but we need you to add these additional features. And you say, okay. The risk would be if you build features that are so narrow, so specific to their needs that it's not going to help your product, then you have to charge professional services for those, right? And frankly, it would be a lot better if you just said no and didn't do them, unless you want to become a consulting company. So you have to decide at the beginning, am I a product company or a consulting company? And if I'm a product company, I only make improvements to my product that are going to be good for the market I'm going after. And so I think you said we're selling software for like, did you mention like high ropes courses or like
Yes.
kind of adventure type stuff?
Yes.
So if you're going to a particular company that's in that space and they say, we want you to make these changes, and you're looking at it going, oh yeah, those are good changes. That's on my product roadmap. Those are things I want to do. Great, right? That's a totally wonderful thing to do. The flip side is you should say, look, we'll do that for you as part of your subscription, but you are going to put your name on our website, and you're going to let us profile you as a customer, right? So it's a quid pro quo. There's a you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and that's a good deal. That's a good deal for them. They're getting custom work. They're getting that custom solution. That's really good for them. You're getting a use case that's good for you. So that's a win-win. But if you build things that are too specific, too narrow to their very unique set of circumstances, then you're wasting time and it's not going to help your product. In fact, it could actually hurt your product. You could end up having things in your product that are too complicated, and that would be really bad. So what I'm about to say is hard, but it's best is if you could get another company to do the same thing and kind of use them to check against each other. So if one company is asking for something, you can go to the other company, hey, we're thinking about building this. You don't have to tell them who you're building it for. You say, hey, we're thinking about building this. What do you think of it? And they're like, well, we would never use that. Or that's actually going to be harmful because it's going to slow down the steps in the process. Now you have to ask yourself, okay, is there a better something in between, or what can I do? But in that company I gave you the example of earlier where we had three big first customers, they kind of did a divide and conquer. And so there was a lot of functionality that was being requested by Coca-Cola that was very different than what Microsoft wanted to do. And so they had to find like kind of a happy medium. And in some cases, they had to figure out a way to have a feature that you could turn it on or turn it off because some companies wanted it, some companies didn't. But everything you do like that just adds complexity to your code base. So anything you can do to reduce the complexity on your code base is going to be good. So just watch out for over customization. That's what I would say.
Yes, I mentioned.
Sander has the problem that his reflexes are consulting reflexes, not product reflexes. So he's going to have to work extra hard to keep inside that box. So this is where you should pre-sell the product to do the development to like 10 people and use those 10 people as a guide to keep it all focused on the generic instead of the specific. Brittany, you had a question.
Yeah, you were talking a lot about this sort of balance between having the consulting services that make sure that you're delivering the best possible product or outcome. You don't want to become a consulting company. Is there sort of in your mind, I know there's no one answer, but in your mind, is there sort of a golden ratio that you've seen work out best between services and consulting?
Yeah, I don't know that there's like a golden ratio or that, VCs are looking for any particular like ratio for sure. I can say that in our case, here's something to watch out for. So maybe there's a little bit of a golden ratio here. This is not so much on the valuation end as it is on the what customers are willing to tolerate end. I found that if we had a solution at one point in one of the companies I was at where they were trying to sell the solution for $15,000 and then they were doing the implementation for $15,000. Well, the customers were okay with that. The idea that there was some sort of application and the cost of the application on an annual basis was about the same as the implementation. That was like a 1x. That was very tolerable. The problem was that the implementation was taking way longer than $15,000 would justify. And so really we needed to charge more for that. And there were some cases where the salespeople, I was the COO of this company, the salespeople were like saying, oh, they won't tolerate a higher price. I said, well, then we're not going to do it because we can't do $40,000 worth of work for $15,000. It's just, when you have professional services, it is what it is. Like you have to pay people to do the work. It's not, you don't have the margins that you have in software. And so I said, we have to charge more. And so we had a couple of situations where we were trying to charge $15,000 for the implementation or for the software, and then $45,000 for the implementation. And they just wouldn't buy it. They're like, $45,000, that's ridiculous. And so what we realized is that those companies that were so small that when you add up all their users, the total price only added up to $15,000, or when you add up all their assets, or however you price yourself in this case, that we couldn't, there was a threshold below which we just couldn't get our implementation price lower than that. We couldn't get our implementation price lower than $40,000, or actually ended up being 30. So we couldn't get lower than 30. And so we basically decided that we were only going to sell deals to where the software also added up to 30. And if it added up to less than 30, we weren't even going to try, because we knew the implementation is going to cost 30. And if we go in there and we say, yeah, your software is 10 and your implementation is 30, they're going to choke and throw up and barf and make a big scene, and it's not worth it. So what we started doing is just saying to every new customer that we talked to, hey, if they were small, we would always start right out of the gate. Hey, just so you know, our minimum implementation is $30,000 and a $30,000 implementation fee. So 30,000 subscription and a 30,000 implementation fee. And if they choked on that, we're like, okay, sorry. And we would just move on. Actually, the salespeople had a hard time with that. And sadly, I had to fire them and start over because they were so accustomed to selling stuff for cheap. That was a frustrating set of circumstances, but nonetheless, that's what happened.
So the other approach to that that's worth understanding is that if you find a bunch of those customers where the implementation is 30 and the product price is 10, and you can find 10 customers that have the same implementation problem, then you can gather that group of 10 and do a group buy essentially, and then their implementation cost is, nominally 3 instead of 30. They're willing to do that, and actually you're going to charge 5 for all of them because it's going to cost you time and money to get that group to behave. But for 5, they get $30,000 worth of implementation fee, but they have to align with the other 9 people in the club, right? And
yeah,
so there are ways to get your salespeople to sort of sort people into piles. And when you get a pile of people that are in coherence with each other in that smaller chunk, you can sell that in a different way.
Yeah, implementing what you're talking about is actually extremely difficult if you're doing it chunk by chunk. If you decide as a business, hey, we have lots and lots of people coming at us wanting to do this for the 5,000 to 10,000 range, but we just can't get our implementation down that low, then you need to ask yourself, is there a different implementation approach that we could use that would be more automated or more self-directed? But now you're talking about building a different business approach. And so you need to be honest with yourself about that and say, is there enough of that opportunity? So if it's like, oh yeah, we got 4 or 5 of those, it's not worth rebuilding your business model. But if you're getting like, gosh, every month we're getting 10 of these and we keep saying no to them, well, maybe let's create a new business model that has a self-directed implementation with self-training and self-implementation or self-integration with Zapier or something like that. And now you can say, okay, now we have this new price point that's $10,000 instead of $30,000 or $5,000, and the implementation is $5,000 because it includes 5 coaching sessions rather than this like full-on 6-week implementation full time. So, but you have to make sure there's a market for that. I mean, again, the challenge with the startup is you got a couple of these and a couple of those and a couple of these. You've got to pick one and stick with that for a while, which means that you're going to say no to some opportunities. That's the other thing that's really, really hard for salespeople, is to say no. But that's, having that restraint will help you in the long run to have more predictable and reproducible success.
Other questions?
Yeah, I've got one. So Mark, you've already kind of addressed this in some of your comments about, like, know your industry and be able to get warm intros or work your network. But, I'm trying to do customer discovery in a segment that I don't know super well. I mean, it's grocery stores. And I'm wondering, like, how to get my foot in the door and talk with people. And I've run into this in other situations too, where, like, getting the right person on the phone or on a Zoom call is challenging because everybody's busy, and it's like, what do I want to talk to this person? I'm wondering, how should I approach that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough one for sure. One of the other things that's just a reality of enterprise sales is, and this is probably a reality of all kinds of sales ultimately, but it's kind of more obvious in enterprise sales, is that people buy from people they like. And so relationship does matter. There's all this AI work and there's all this stuff around, like, we're going to automate this and automate that and automate this and that. But the fact is, at the end of the day, still there's people involved, and most people like people and dealing with people that they like dealing with. I'm certainly one of them. So one of my thoughts in what you're talking about there is to try and find some common ground, some way to provide something of value to them, to have some kind of connections, to just make it more human, make it more personal. I don't know if any of you guys have ever taken the How to Win Friends and Influence People, read that book by Dale Carnegie, or ever taken the Dale Carnegie course. It's a 100-year-old course and a 100-year-old book, but it is absolutely, like, timeless truths. And one of the timeless truths in there is people like to help people. They just do. And so if you can approach someone and say, I need your help. I think I have a solution that would be really interesting for grocery store owners. But I don't know for sure. And I would love if you'd be willing to just sit with me for 15 minutes and let me kind of, pick your brain and learn a little bit more about this. That's hard to say no to. I mean, and you might send that out to 10 people and 9 of them are going to say no. And maybe 6 of them will be kind of feeling a little bit bad about it because they feel like, oh, I should help this guy, but I don't have time. But one of them will say yes. And eventually you're going to find somebody who says yes, and then treat them really well, and be really vulnerable, right? I mean, I've just found that kind of an approach to be really, really effective, to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to thank them profusely, to offer anything you can back to them. And you may not have much to offer, but that's okay. You don't have, you can pay it forward, right? I mean, that's the way the world works. We can't always return the favor. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but I think that's the right thing to do, right? I'm not doing it, I have to be willing to accept gifts, and then I can turn around and give those gifts to others. And that's just the way the world works. That's okay. So ask for help, and then be really, really appreciative.
One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Anybody have a last question?
I have one if no one else has.
Great.
You mentioned that you have to mention the price in the first conversation. So I had a conversation with a client who asked for the price, and I wanted to find out how many equipments they have, how many courses. Based on that, we have the price. And I didn't want to tell them the price. And yes, he gone. We didn't manage to continue the conversation. So probably I should mention at least the price range or something, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. And sometimes you'll get somebody who comes to you and, like, the first question they ask is, what's your price? 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 Again, I would say if you're in the business of price competition, like your whole selling point is our price is lower, then great, come out with it right away. But if you're selling something that's very innovative, that is usually a big red flag to me. If they're just all about price, then I oftentimes find that that's not going to be somebody who ends up buying from you, because they're thinking about price and not value. So if you can't have a conversation with them about that pretty early, and they don't get it pretty early, I think your chance of closing the deal goes down to like 1 in 10 or lower. So something that I've done is so when I was selling a product where our bottom price was $40K, $40,000 for the software and $40,000 for the implementation, I would start, if I was talking to an organization that I thought is kind of in that range where I knew that was going to potentially be an issue, like if I was talking to Google, I wouldn't even bother to talk about that, because I know their price is going to be much higher than that. But if I'm talking to this smaller company, they have kind of a smaller portfolio, smaller set of requirements, I would say, okay, listen, our minimum price is X. And now you're setting an expectation with them of like, hey, if they're not in this range or above, then forget about it. So that is an approach you can take, but still it's a warning flag to me if they're just like price. Now on the reverse side, sometimes what I've suggested is actually you want to bring it up with them. But before I do that, I typically want to ask a whole lot of questions of them of like, who are you? What are you doing? What's your thinking? What are your needs? What are you looking for? What are your big objectives? Just, how many people do you have? How many systems, whatever, all the different things that are going to impact your price, and learn as much as you possibly can. But then at the end of that conversation is then when I'm usually saying, okay, listen, I think that there's a good fit here, but I do want to just tell you right out of the gate that you're looking at a price that's going to be, minimum is going to be around X. And then you can gauge from what they say on what you do to help you know what to do next. Is that helpful?
Thank you so very much.
Yes,
Mark.
thank you.
Yeah. So fortunately, that specific question is what next week is about. So if you found yourself an audience, a market, you think you're selling to a specific market, there's an adoption curve of innovation. And the people that you're trying to go to that care about price are on the trailing edge of that adoption curve, not on the leading edge. And if you're doing something new, you want the early adopters, or as Patrick Hogan thinks about it, he thinks you need gateway adopters, which are the late early adopters. But nonetheless, at the front end of the curve, there's a small percentage of people you want to engage with. And there's a few psychographic questions you can ask that will help you identify these people. And so we will dive into that in some detail next week. And I put